we've always protected employees from working in these hot conditions, trained well. And so it's just a matter of doing some of the things that we've always done, but maybe a little more documentation. And we'll figure our way out around this one and how to do it, how to meet the requirements. But the main thing at the end of the day, you protect the employees. You want them to go home every day the same way they arrived at work, and
Yep.
it's the nature of the business.
Yep.
You're going to work in hot days. You're going to work on cold days. You're going to work on good days.
Yep.
But you'd send that employee home the way they came.
Welcome to the Feed Science Podcast. My name is Adam Farrenholz. I'm coming to you from the Animal Food Program at North Carolina State University and on behalf of Wisenetics. My guest today is from the American Feed Industry Association. Gary Huddleston is the Director of Manufacturing and Regulatory Affairs for AFIA. Thanks for joining us, Gary. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Excellent. Per our kind of normal process of going through, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself to the audience and give us a bit of your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing there at AFIA.
Well, thank you, Adam. As Adam said, I'm the Director of Feed Manufacturing and Regulatory Affairs for American Feed Industry Association. I've been in this job since 2015. Prior to that, I spent 31 years in feed manufacturing working for one company, which is kind of odd these days, but I spent all my years working with one company, managing several different plants for Southern States Cooperative. And so I come from a feed manufacturing background.
Gotcha. And so what kind of made that the move to AFIA? Like, why did that happen? What interested you about kind of going into the that side, the trade association side of the business?
It's kind of an interesting story. I'd never thought about doing this kind of work before. I was pretty happy managing feed plants and enjoyed that. We actually won the AFIA Feedstuffs Feed Mill of the Year for the second time in 2014. And Keith Epperson was the person in my job at that time, and he was out and he was getting ready to retire. And Keith kept kind of poking on me the whole time he was there at the plant visiting with us. You need to apply for this job. You need to apply for this job. And I kept telling, no, I don't think I'd be interested in that, Keith. And eventually, I agreed to talk to him about it and talk with Richard Sellers and Joel Newman and interviewed. And the more we talked, the more I thought, this would be a nice career change. And so it has been good. I've really enjoyed what I'm doing.
It's funny. So as I think about going back in my first interactions with AFIA were when I was a student and a graduate student at Kansas State, and the feed manufacturing course that happened there, and the feed advisory board, AFIA folks being on there, and it's just hit me as you said that. And maybe this isn't something to put out on a podcast or not, but it's okay. As you said that, I thought, Gary, so Keith is gone, and Richard is gone, and Joel is gone, and you kind of get to be you've kind of turned into senior statesman at AFIA, haven't you?
Yeah, as far as working with the major regulatory things in the agencies that hit us in feed manufacturing, I'm pretty much the point person on all that.
Yeah, so I guess it's largely like you and Leah Wilkinson are probably the ones that have been around and been there the longest at this point.
And Sarah Novak is,
And
yeah,
Sarah Novak. Yep. Okay, so those the three of you.
I think she's got tenure on all of us.
All right, there you go.
I'm about third in line now.
We'll have to get Sarah on here at some point. I'm sure she's got some really good stories from her perspective of her part of the job as well.
Yeah.
All right. So, as director of manufacturing and regulatory affairs, what does that job particularly entail at FAA, doing things on behalf of the feed industry?
So my major responsibilities are really keeping up with any kind of regulations that we have to deal with in feed manufacturing, and work with those agencies, keep our members informed of what's coming down the pike. And so, Yeah, I work a lot with FDA, but OSHA and EPA. I'm the primary point person for OSHA, EPA, DOT, and keeping up with anything new coming down the pike, and informing our members on how best to comply. Do a lot of PCQI training as well as part of my job, but again, I'm the main point person for OSHA and EPA.
And I imagine, I think probably anytime, I would assume anytime that we are, so as we record this, we're sitting here in July 2024. We know we're going to, have a major election. We may or may not have an administration change this time around. Sometimes we know we're going to if someone's term limited, but if not. So I'd imagine, things like changes of what's going on in administration are potentially always interesting to you. And then, of course, just here recently, we've had some really interesting things happen at the Supreme Court level, where we've decided maybe the regulatory bodies don't have as much authority to make rules or interpret law to make their rules as was previously considered. I assume that comes into play as far as what you guys think. Okay, how are we going to be approaching things differently in some of our conversations now?
Yeah, that was a big decision a couple of weeks ago, and I think will change how our regulatory agencies work from here on out. Because everything moved with the ebbs and flows of changes of administration. We've seen a whole lot different things come out of the agencies during Trump's administration than we have in Biden's administration, and so it's honestly my job's got a lot harder because there's a lot more coming at us.
Mhm.
A lot more to keep up with and follow in this administration. And so we'll see how that plays out. But I think it was a good move, a smart move on behalf of our country, and because a lot of times what Congress intended to happen with a regulation is not how the agency interpreted it. And every time administration changed, things changed in interpretations.
Yeah, it not I mean, light bedtime reading if you wanna put yourself to sleep, but if anybody's ever really interested in it, at some point, and, you can pick something OSHA, EPA, take something that, the what led to the Food Safety Modernization Act. Go read the law that Congress wrote,
Hmm.
and then go read the regulation, and any person that reads it will go, "Well, wait a minute, where did this come from? Because it's not in the law," which is not to say that the process is necessarily wrong, because they can't put everything absolutely codified in the law that's got to go in the regulation. But you do find that there ends up having to be a lot of interpretation that has to go on of, okay, well, what did exactly they mean by that? Or how much authority do we have under this particular law? And I imagine that that becomes a lot of what you guys are doing from a advocacy, lobbyist,
Hmm.
whatever function that AFIA is in that particular moment, of going and saying, "Hey, actually, as we look at what the legal standard is, we're not sure that this is the right interpretation, and this is how it's negatively affecting our industry without leading to any necessary improvement in safety or efficiency or anything on our terms." So I'd assume that becomes a lot of your job, is going and taking those meetings and saying, okay, well, here's what our industry thinks and here's our position, and having negotiation or discussion, for lack of a better term, on where to go from there.
Yeah, and have asking those questions. How did you get from point A to point Z? And, how did you get to where you? A perfect example is the recent OSHA walkaround
Mhm.
representative designator or designation rule, where they can designate an employee representative to walk around during an OSHA inspection, and that's an old rule that was put in place back in Reagan's administration, and basically to allow unionized facilities to have the union rep to walk around with the ocean spray. That's a good thing. And,
Mhm.
nothing, no big issue there. During Obama's administration, that got stretched, and all of a sudden it was non-union shops were bringing in union representatives to walk around with the OSHA inspector, and it, very clearly it looked like it was a ploy to get more unions in the country, and so
Mm.
and they did that through a letter of interpretation based on the Chevron difference, and then when Trump's administration came into office, then that changed. because that was meeting with a lot of legal challenges. And so they immediately dropped it and said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. Uh, fast forward 4 more years down the road, here it comes again. This time, OSHA said, we're not going to mess with the legal challenges of just doing it through an interpretation letter. We're going to go ahead and do some rulemaking, and that's what they did. And they took what normally takes about 7 years and got it done in about 7 months, because they declared this as a non-economic,
Hmm.
non-substantial rulemaking, so we can fast forward and get it done very quickly. Because the goal was to get it done quick enough so that it's done before it could change again.
Not that we necessarily need to like belabor that one particular rule too far, but my understanding too is like you had mentioned it gives potentially the ability to like bring a union person into a non-union plant, but it even goes beyond that, right? Like any kind of third party, we can decide to bring anybody in, and now management's looking at going, why is this person walking around with the OSHA person? Who is that? And it's really wide open of who that third party person could be, right?
It's up to the ocean inspector to make that determination who they think is okay. And yeah, it really widened up who they could bring in. They could bring in, maybe there's an injury at the plant or a death at the plant, and that's why the inspection's going on. They could actually bring in the employees' lawyers or representatives, and it's could, rather than bringing in necessarily who they need to be make the inspection better, they've got the opportunity to bring things in that could totally change the whole inspection.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that gets to be again part of that discussion of, hey, in theory, we don't necessarily have a problem with your idea because if you want to bring in, I don't know, a fire marshal type or some engineer because we're trying to figure out, well, I don't know how we're going to get the right kind of ladder there. Like, please, yeah, that helps everybody out. What
Yep,
we're concerned is not going outside of the intended box, and how do we make sure that happens?
exactly. Yeah. And and again, they were trying to get this pushed through very quickly and designated it as a non-substantial rule, and want to get it through before it could be rescinded under the Congressional Review Act, and
Right.
so they were successful in getting that one done.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So that's not the only one. That's there's always things going on. We've got some interesting things currently happening on the FDA side with the bringing in some potential new ways to do additives, and we're all kind of crossing our fingers on that. Makes some things a little easier, and not that not that any of us love any kind of overburdensome regulation or anything like that, but certainly as we look around again, not to make this not evergreen, but for those of you that are watching this a long time from now, July of 2024 is pretty hot in a lot of places. And so I know there's some rules coming now about, well, are facilities and companies really doing what they have to be or should be, or what the government thinks we should do on things related to making sure our employees don't get overheated. Now, a lot of us that have been in mills for a long time know that, okay, that's certainly something that can happen. They're not air conditioned, but we also have known for a long time that, yeah, we have always wanted to take good care of our people. Like that's the good facilities, which most facilities by and large are good facilities, and we know that the management wants to take good care of their people. They want them to continue to want to work there, and they want them to be healthy. And so we've known that we've had to deal with heat, but there's some stuff coming now, right? That's gonna maybe make that a little bit more. No, this is what you have to do, and here's how you have to show what you're doing. So, what are some of the things that are happening with that heat standard?
Well, this was a major priority for OSHA in this administration, and they jumped on it pretty quickly and just released the standard last week, the proposed standard, and so we got a first look at it. Been studying it on it quite a bit this week, looking at the requirements. It covers most workplaces in the United States. Obviously, it's going to cover feed mills. Like you said, we've done things we've known we needed to take care of employees, and uh, the company I work for, we always train for working in hot conditions and train our employees what to look for. But you also train about what dangers of working in cold conditions. So both are can be dangerous. But This rule, we've been following it for a while, but there OSHA's work on this regulation. We participated in the Small Business Administration process through one of our members, where they got to get on with OSHA and give them recommendations. It ended up being a little more, quite a bit more prescriptive than what we had hoped, less flexible than what we had hoped. It includes two trigger points, an initial trigger point, and it's based on. I think most of our facilities will use the heat index. You can also use the wet bulb globe
Hmm.
temperature. Not, I don't completely understand that. I think that's more to do with that working outside because it brings in direct sunlight. I think our facilities will use the heat index. So the initial trigger is 80 degrees, a heat index of 80 degrees. You've got to put some things in place. And then the high heat index is 90 degrees. So you got to ratchet up even more. So you've worked around feed mills enough to know that those are pretty low.
Yeah,
Those are
yeah.
lower than what we thought they should be. And that's where it gets kind of prescriptive. Is you've got to do some things. Now there are some exemptions. Some, they call them sedentary exemptions. So if you got a job where you're pretty much sitting down,
Hmm.
that would include sitting on a forklift. If that's all you do all day and you just occasionally stand up or occasionally walk, you're not lifting anything more than 10 pounds, that particular job or employee could be exempt. So it gets a little, but working in the feed mill, we all do. You've been there enough to know that employees do multiple jobs and they're going to probably not be able to get away from that 10-pound restriction. Big requirements, a written plan. I think most facilities probably have that in place or have something in place. Most
Something like that.
facilities do training, but if you got 10 or more employees, which would be most feed mills in our country would have that, then you would have to have a written plan. And y- just like a lot of the standards, you got to go out and conduct a hazard evaluation, determine those work areas in your plant or those jobs in their plant that could actually get above those trigger points. And so that's the thing that you're evaluating against. Does this particular uh, spot or work area have the potential of getting above 80, getting above 90 as far as the heat index? And there's not too many places in the country that you're not going to have at some time of the year have work areas that get above that. So it's going to cover that. OSHA went in a little different direction than I've ever seen them go in. One thing they're requiring that you name a heat safety coordinator.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we don't see that in a
Mm-mm.
lot of the other standards. So you got to name specifically somebody in your plant that's has the major responsibility of carrying this out, carrying this plan out. Another thing they required was that you've got to provide this written plan to employees in their language. And I don't think I've ever seen that before as a direct requirement. So if you've got Spanish speaking employees in your plant, we've all known if you've got folks that can't really, English is their second language and they don't really understand it, you got to get a better way of training those. We do that. But this is a more specific requirement. If you've got those other languages, that then you got to provide that written plan in that language, and you got to do the training in that language. And so that's a little bit different. Require you got to make that plan accessible to the employees at all times, and that's a little different as well. But in that plan, it does require us to involve non-management employees. So we most of the facilities in our industry are going to have a safety committee, and that's how I would recommend doing it. Use your safety committee to develop this plan and have non-supervisory employees on that safety committee, and that way you can meet that requirement. Probably the most burdensome requirement is the monitoring. So you got the trigger points of 80 and the trigger point of 90, and so OSHA says you've got to monitor your work areas and determine when you get to those trigger points. And when you get to those trigger points, there are things you have to do.
Okay.
And so that's where the burdensome point of the rule comes in. And they're fairly easy things to do at the initial trigger point. You just got to provide access to clean and cool drinking water. That's easy. We do that anyway. Cool break areas, air conditioned if possible. Most plants are going to have an air conditioned break room they can go into, so that's pretty easy. Increased air movement through fans and things like that. Most plants will do that as well. So, those are the three main requirements at the initial point. That's pretty easy to do. The high heat requirement's a little more restrictive or a little more burdensome, but again, it's things we normally do that they go to say required 15-minute breaks every 2 hours, paid break every 2 hours. But, my experience in the industry is we typically allow that in manufacturing anyway. You got a break every 2 hours, then a lunch. So the employees are going to have three breaks during that 8 hour shift: morning break, lunch break, afternoon break. So you easily meet that requirement. I don't know of any plants that don't do that, but there may be some out there. That's pretty easy to do. But then the observation, once you reach that 90-degree level, you got to have an observation plan in place, either using a buddy system or the supervisor coming occasionally and looking after it. And that these requirements are in addition to what you've already put in place at the initial trigger point.
A couple things that come to mind. I have a few questions as you go through. I'm gonna go back first, then we're gonna come back to the what you just said. But when you said the 10 employees, is that, when we think about the stuff that happened with like the Food Safety Modernization Act, it was like employees in the company. It didn't just matter facility. Here, I'm assuming it means actually employees in the facility, 10 or
So
more employees in the facility. And is it 10 or more affected employees, or is it like, well, no, it's 10, does it count all the people that work there, or it's like, well, this is a forklift operator, this is a control room operator, these are truck drivers, so we're taking them off the list? Or is it, hey, if there's 10 people here, period?
that's a great question, and I'm not a 100% positive on the answer, but the way I interpret it would be 10 facility employees, basically employees on your payroll. They could be truck drivers or plant employees or maintenance, or but that's the way I interpret it in my
Okay.
initial read through. But that's a great question. It could be, if you narrow it down to affected employees, then you could eliminate your office workers because they're not going to be affected.
Right.
They're in air conditioning all the time. But again, that's just doesn't say you don't have to have a plan. It just says if you got less than 10, you don't have to write it down.
Right.
My
Exactly.
recommendation, do it anyway.
Do
Have
it
a
anyway.
plan, write it down.
Yep.
What good's a plan that you don't write down?
And in all these things, it's and this is where it gets so tricky as we talk about this stuff, and it's going to lead to my next question too. And it's that, as we sit here and talk about this, someone stumbles across this podcast, this video, and it's not part of our industry. It's like, boy, it sounds like they're talking about trying how to like get out of this. And it's like, no, 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 no.
Oh, it's
Trying to
completely
get out
opposite.
of keeping people safe. Some of these sounds like really good ideas. Just trying to figure out, do we really have to have these rules and do this writing down and have the plan and all this to make it effective?
Exactly.
Do we have a whole bunch of and look, if we do, we do, and we should fix it. Do we have a whole bunch, just a rash of heat stroke problems in feed mills across the country that I'm unaware of? And it's like, or in any business, right? That I'm unaware of. And if the answer is yes, then okay, government needs to step in and make sure that the workers are safe. But I mean, look, like you said, I've been in mills and you've been in mills, and it's hot, and it always seems like we've always been pretty good about, look, man, it's time to take a break. We need to go sit in
Yep.
the control room, need to get a
Exactly.
drink. And so it's not about not wanting to have rules if the rules are needed. It's that different. So that was my next question when you were talking about like when you hit that higher level, you're going to have breaks. Is this going to be like, hey, your policy says, do people have breaks? Cool. Because I'm OSHA, I can go ask the employees and they can tell me, yes, I'm getting my break and we're good. Or is it, no, once it's over 90, I'm going to have some sort of sheet and I'm going to have to provide you documentation that shows that they're taking these breaks. Has there been any discussion on that to this point?
Yeah, the way I read the regulation, that we don't have to do record keeping around
Okay.
breaks. You would have to, pretty much in your plan state, and it'd be very simple for most companies. Okay, our policy is heat or not, heat, hot or cold, we got 15-minute breaks every 2 hours and
Right.
lunch break in the middle of the day, so you're covered there. Uh, the major record keeping is requirements going to be around the
Okay.
monitoring of the heat index.
Yep, I've initialed here on this sheet that yes, we know it got above 80
Yeah,
and or we know it got above 90. And so from, you know, 8:17 in the morning on that Thursday when it hit over this, we put this into place. Like there is going to be a record keeping requirement there.
yeah, it does require. It didn't really get real specific in the regulatory language of what that looks like. Now, there's an out. I've been looking at it even before we got on the call this morning. That was my main thing I was working on this morning and continuing to review that regulation. There's an out that I see because think about those things that I just stated. You at the initial heat trigger, cool water. We
Mhm.
do that, don't we?
Yep.
Cool break areas doesn't specify you have to have air conditioning, but somewhere where it's cooler. But most of us have air
Yep.
conditioning right here. That's easy to do. Increased air movements. Most of us in the hot months, we've got fans out there for the workers.
Yep.
That's easy to do. Required paid breaks if it goes above the 90 mark. That's easy to do. We do that. Don't we usually do the buddy system or supervisors monitoring employees to make sure that we're not having those issues? We've got all that stuff in place. So there is an exemption from the monitoring that I just kind of, as I was reading through it this morning, just sort of dawned on me, you know what? If I do all those things, I can assume we're always above the 90 degrees and
Mm.
put all that stuff in place. It's
Yeah.
there in place, it's in place all the time.
Yeah.
And that is probably what I'm going to recommend to our members make, unless you want to fight all this. And because if you're going to do the monitoring, then you got to buy the instrumentation to put in the different work areas. It's going to give you warnings and all that.
Just comply. Just comply at the highest level and be done with it.
That's the easiest way that I, because we do the things anyway. If these were ridiculous things,
Sure.
it'd be one thing. Now, the only what I call a ridiculous thing that they required in the rule was the acclimatization of the new employees or
Uh,
returning employees. We were hoping, and I thought we had kind of convinced them through the Small Business Administration process to not make that very prescriptive, to allow the facilities to figure that out on their own. But they came in and said brand new employees cannot, if they start and they're subject to working in hot conditions immediately, you have to acclimatize them. And and instead of a month, they narrowed it down to a week,
okay.
20% on the first day. So if you hire a brand new employee in July,
They can work 1 day a week.
they can only work 20% the first day. They can work 40% the second day. They can
Okay.
work 60% the third day. The fourth day, they can work 80%. And by the fifth day, they can work a regular 8 hour shift. Now, I don't like that because, if you're hiring an employee, and so then companies got to decide, okay, we can only work them this percentage. Do we pay them for a full 8 hour day, get 2 hours work out of it?
Can I put them in the office with all their training material where it's cool
Yeah.
for that other 80%? Because that's what I'm gonna be doing is like, okay, guess 80% of your day is gonna be training.
Do that first because you got to provide the initial training anyway. That's
Yeah.
the other requirement of the rule is provide training before they
Yeah.
ever go into the hot. So we can still kind of manage our way through this. Uh, but I was a little disappointed they were so prescriptive in that acclimatizing these new employees. And you also got, if somebody's out for vacation or extended leave for over 14 days, say they were sick or
Right.
went on a 2 week cruise,
Yeah.
unless you can prove they were working in those hot conditions, you got to treat that returning employee kind of like a brand new employee.
Gotcha.
It's not quite as restrictive. It's like a 3 day process of acclimatizing,
Okay.
but you still got to do that as well. And then, since that's a requirement, I would think you would probably ought to document
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
because they're
Interesting.
probably going to ask about that. So that would be it's not a real specified record keeping requirement, but
Yeah.
it is a requirement. So they're going to ask you, can you prove how you acclimatize this brand new employee? So yeah, here's their time cards, and here's what they did. So I'm disappointed in that they went down that path. But again, I think we can manage our way through it
Mhm.
by splitting their day up, like you said, stick them in there. back even 20 years ago when I was in the feed mill, you stuck an employee in the office for a day or two looking at videos and getting all
Right.
their safety training. So you can kind of break that up a little bit, not do it all the first day and spread it out over the week to and have them let them have some time in the air conditioning to watch all their videos.
Yeah, absolutely. Right before we get off this this part of our conversation and start our wrap up, I think one of the other things that I think this could end up being one of those fun examples of and it's not that anybody did anything wrong. It's these things just happen, but how regulations and different agencies end up having compliance becomes a problem because you're going to walk in now to a facility in July and every door is going to be open and fans are going to be running because it's going to I got to get air movement in here. Again, something that we've all done for a long time. Then my state or FDA inspector walks into my and it's like, I mean, I would really like to see all these doors closed. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just a place for pests to get in. It's like, well, I'm going to need you to go talk to my OSHA inspector
yeah,
because they said I need to have air movement and you said I need to have the doors closed. And guess what? I can't do
yeah,
both of those things.
exactly.
Which regulation wins out? Someone let me know. And it's always interesting, we've got these things, we've got, FDA things that, wait, if we do this for FDA, how's that going to work with USDA? Not that that's usually a feed mill problem, but on like complexes, it becomes an issue. And FDA wants us to do this, but OSHA wants us to do this. Well, how am I going to do both of these things at the same time? And EPA wants me to do this, but OSHA says I can't go in there to clean that. So, and I think this is an interesting one of, well, you want the doors open or closed in the summer? Somebody pick one and let us know.
That'll be an interesting problem. We'll see how that works out. But
Yeah,
again, like you said, we've been protected. I think our industry does a great job of protecting employees for the most part. And there's always bad actors out there,
sure.
but I think for the most part, we've got a history of doing a great job. We've always protected employees from working in these hot conditions, trained well. And so it's just a matter of doing some of the things that we've always done, but maybe a little more documentation. And we'll figure our way out around this one and how to do it, how to meet the requirements. But the main thing at the end of the day, you protect the employees. You want them to go home every day the same way they arrived at work, and
Yep.
it's the nature of the business.
Yep.
You're going to work in hot days. You're going to work on cold days. You're going to work on good days.
Yep.
But you'd send that employee home the way they came.
That's I was always taught that, and that's what we teach now. That's job number one,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
The feed is what it is, and the equipment is what it is. We're gonna do our best. Job number one is the people, and always has been, always
Yeah,
should be. So,
safe.
It's time for our famous three.
with all that in mind, I'm gonna wrap up here. So the first one of our normal wrap up questions is, if anybody would like to be more informed on this or any of the other standards, any of the other things going on in the regulatory side of the feed world, what are some good resources that you guys at AFIA would recommend and kind of put your stamp on of, hey, go get your information from here and maybe not so much of the Twitter or the TikTok or whatever random thing on the internet. Here's a good place to go learn about what's really going on.
Yeah, number one, hook up directly with the agencies.
Hmm.
Be sure that you're checking the OSHA website, you're checking the FDA website. They've got great guidance there, and you can always don't get your information secondhand. Be in tune with the agent.
Hmm.
Become a member of AFI if you're not. That would be my number one thing to say because we do so much for you. We keep in touch with the agencies. We go to bat for you with the agencies. We're gonna let you know. We've been talking to OSHA. Here's how we recommend complying. We've been talking with FDA. We've got this thing going on. You need to go review that in your food safety plan. Make sure you're covered. So we're going to keep you up to date. We've got a great website that helps with lots of great resources there. We've got a public blog. Even if you're not a member of AFA, you can read our blogs, and we write blogs a lot about these kinds of issues as well. Don't give you as much information as we would if you're a member, but as a member, myself and all of our L&R staff are at your disposal. I was thinking this morning how many calls and how many emails have I fielded this week on different issues, and I couldn't even count them all up. And
Yeah.
that's a big part of what we do. Members got an issue, got a question, they're gonna give us a call, write us an email, we're gonna respond, and we're gonna help them out. So, I've obviously I'm a little biased, but I always leaned on AFIA when I was back in the industry, and that's kind of given me a unique perspective that as I got into this job, be responsive to members and help them out, and that's what we do.
Excellent. So then taking that and going off on more of a personal slash professional side, resources that you've found in your career, and they don't necessarily have to be directly related to feed or regulatory affairs, but something that this was a really good book I read, or this is a person that I have listened to a lot, or something like that, that you felt that, you know, with people ask me, do you have any recommendations for my personal slash professional growth? This is the recommendation I would give.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I kind of look back over my career, and first 31 years, I was limited to, one company.
Hmm.
A lot of great people in that company. I could just sit here and name them all day long. The people was exposed to, my supervisors over the years really helping out, and mentors. But then as I grew into this position, it's just amazing that how many great folks are out there in their industry. My recommendation would be, to whatever piece of if you're in liquid feed, or if you're into commercial dry, or an integrator, there's folks within the industry in those segments that you can pick as mentors. Get to know those folks.
Yeah.
Folks in your company, pick those folks that you can consider a mentor, and have conversations with them. Sit down and say, how can my career, what can I do? What have you learned that maybe I haven't figured out yet? And just have a lot of good conversations like that.
Yeah. I think that's, yeah, and that one comes up in different forms or fashions, quite a bit of utilizing the people that you get access to, and that dovetails real nice into our very last question here, which is, as you have worked with mentors and mentees and everything in between, what are, if you had to pick a trait or a quality of the people that seem to be the most successful, the people that I work with, that it's like they're the easiest to work with, they seem to really have their stuff, what are the thing or a couple things that they all seem to be this, or they all seem to do that?
Honesty and integrity has always been a characteristic that I've admired, and when I moved into this job, and I was learning a lot from Richard Sellers and Joel Newman while they were in their positions and leading our organization. And one thing Richard always taught me: be responsive to member needs. That's your main job.
Hmm.
I've kind of picked up on that, and I hope I've done what Richard recommended, and I try to be as responsive as I can. But figure out what your job is. What am I supposed to do as a plant manager? You better be responsive to your employees.
Hmm.
I always, when I was back in the plant, my favorite thing to do was get out in the morning and walk around the plant and speak to every employee, and see how, see if there's any issues, and just really be in tune with that. So, I always felt like just, speaking to your employees and speaking to the folks in the industry, listen to the needs, respond.
I think it's excellent advice. Great place to end. Again, my guest today has been Gary Huddleston. Gary is the Director of Manufacturing and Regulatory Affairs with the American Feed Industry Association. Gary, we appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it.
Once again, I'm Adam Fairnolls from North Carolina State University, and on behalf of Wisenetics, thanks very much for listening. This has been the Feed Science Podcast. We will talk to you next time.